Hello and welcome to the PwC Leadership Exchange. We're recording this on May 28th, 160 days out from the US election, and I'm delighted to be joined by Roz Brooks, US Policy Leader for PwC. Roz, what are you telling clients about how they should be preparing for the upcoming US elections in November?
Well, David, once we get past the fact that we are facing the same two candidates in this election, it generally falls into two themes. One is the policy issues at hand. So think about, we know the Tax Cut and Jobs Act is going to expire next year, and so there's going to be a whole debate around that. So thinking about how that will impact your business and scenario planning. And then we also know that from the standpoint of supply chain kind of issues, those policies aren't likely to change with respect to the focus on trade and national security. And so thinking about resiliency of your supply chains and what you would do from that perspective. And then I think for different industries, it depends on what sector you're in. The tech sector might be thinking about issues of data security, privacy, AI, things of that nature. And those in the financial services sector and others are also thinking about how a second Biden term might impact antitrust issues, how the mergers, how they've been looking at those kind of coming forward. I would say the second piece to it, though, is most businesses are aware, they promote civic engagement. They either give employees time off or they do. Yeah. But this election is going to be close. Like most analysts would say that whether it is another term for President Biden or whether former President Trump returns to the White House, it will be a close election. And as a result, the expectation is there will be unrest of some kind, whether that is days after the election, days leading up to the election, months after the election. And so the question for business leaders, many, spoke up, said something post January 6th. There's likely, if former President Trump wins, you're likely to have Democrats who will also object simply because there have been irregularities that they've asserted in the past where they've objected in previous elections. And so will you see a business response similar to what you did post January 6th? Because they weren't tied necessarily. The objections that occurred were not tied to what happened at the Capitol when many businesses made their statements. So I think businesses are starting to think through, how do I position now, knowing that this may be something coming in November? How do I help my constituencies understand how we're going to choose to show up, whether we say something or we choose to not say something.
Very interesting. It's even part of the scenario planning and the psyche. If I pull it out of the US and move to the kind of the global level, right? What do you think is the potential impact of the election, whatever way it falls, on international alliance and partnerships, global trade, foreign investment, foreign intervention, foreign policy? Where does that all go to under either scenario? Yeah,
so I do think, under a continuation of President Biden, that for the most part, you're going to have status quo in terms of the U.S., his belief that the U.S. should take a lead on the global stage, the U.S. should stay and meet its net zero commitments. The U.S. should be a strong supporter of its allies, whether NATO or otherwise. Former President Trump coming in, we've heard from candidate Trump that still has concerns about NATO and questioning the viability and America's kind of role in the organization. So I think there is reason to think that former President Trump coming back, that there's going to be a potential shift in the U.S. stance. You can expect us to pull out of the climate agreement again. And I think this time, the way it worked for us to come back, I think this time will require an act of Congress to support for us to come back, like it's underlying with a treaty. And so that will be challenging because the expectation is that Congress will be closely divided. And so the likelihood of being able to override President Trump's decision to pull out will be difficult kind of to come back in. So, and then the question, and you would ask, is kind of what does that mean for many of our allies who are looking at this and thinking not just with former President Trump, but is this now what the Republican Party may be like in future generations if they were to take the White House in the future? And so how does that form your thinking when you're determining vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis China, and your positioning and posturing and how you have to form allies and shore up your own, whether it's energy or other issues, being in Europe or the UK.
Okay. One other issue, just one other theme to pick up on. When President Trump was first elected in 2016, one of his early policies around immigration and quite draconian rules on immigration. So Biden has obviously softened that up, but has still remained a pretty strict, I mean, a lot of continuation really in the broad thrust of it. Where does that go? Where does immigration policy move? Because it's a very hot topic in Europe right now.
Yeah, it's a hot topic in the U.S. as well. It's one of the, I think, as we talk about what people thought would be lightning rod issues and messaging for each party, it was abortion for Democrats and it was border security for Republicans. And that has not gone away as a challenge for President Biden. And I think to that point, that's why you've seen a shoring up of kind of showing that he is concerned about border security and he has policies to address border security. So I think in a second Biden term, you're going to have to see it's no longer kind of just a political kind of football. It is a crisis in the U.S. where the electorate is kind of saying, you've got to do something about this, whether you believe the narratives or not. It's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy about, macroeconomics, like things seem to be okay, yet people don't feel they're okay. Well, in the case of border security and immigration, things aren't okay, and people don't feel that they're okay. And so no matter who's in the White House, something will have to be done. Now, how far you go, what you do, what policies you bring back, what you roll back, what regulations, that will depend on who's sitting in that White House.
Okay, and can I ask just a final question, the broader agenda for Congress and the White House? Because, as you said, we've a very tight House for the last 4 years, and we've got some senior Democrats retiring, we'll make some elections, some Senate elections very interesting. What does the agenda look like? What does Congress and the White House need to get done in 2025?
Yeah, I think it's all about what's expiring, as it has been for the last, few years or almost decade, I could say. But it's kind of, to your point, what's expiring? The Tax Cut and Jobs Act. It will expire in 2025. It will have to be revisited. The House currently and the Senate are looking at doing appropriations bills. So seeing that appropriations bills get done. I like to say the mundane domestic things of the U.S., stuff. The farm bill, the funding the government, those things will have to get done and continue to get done. And then I think regardless, there are going to be continued focuses around the U.S. competitiveness with China and how to counter China in the context of thinking about national security. So,
with either president?
Yeah, I do think with either president, that will definitely be something on that. And what we've seen, what's been interesting, is even in the Biden administration, you've seen a Congress that has sometimes wanted to go farther than the White House is willing to do. And so I do think potentially with the Trump administration back in, you could have a partner in Congress and the White House willing to go a little bit farther than what this administration has done.
Roz, always insightful, always engaging and interesting. Really appreciate the time. And thank you for all the time. And we look forward to seeing you on the next PwC Leadership Exchange. Thank you.